Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sparring Partners. This is Monica Paolini from Sensafili, and I'm your host. And today we're going to talk again, I would say, since we recently had another podcast on a similar topic with Mario Didio at Helium. So we're going to talk more about Wi-Fi offload. And Wi-Fi offload, it's really important because 80% of traffic. I always quote this, so bear with me. Um, that goes through our devices is through Wi-Fi, and this is especially true for indoor coverage. So whichever way you look at it, offload is really absolutely central to our connectivity. And today I have the honor to talk to Howard Buzick, who is the co-founder at American Bandwidth. And this is interesting because they have a new approach, different approach to offload. And to offload to improve indoor coverage and, well, indoor connectivity. So before I keep going, I would like Howard to introduce himself, and then we'll talk about what they do. It's quite interesting. So Howard, welcome to the podcast, and tell us who you are and what you do.
Hey, Monica. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, so once again, I'm Howard Buzick. I'm co-founder of American Bandwidth. I've been involved in what people have called Wi-Fi offload now for over a decade. And I think I've found a new model that's really quite effective at solving the problem for, I guess, specifically a medium to large size enterprise grade uh, Wi-Fi network deployed buildings. And love to talk a bit more about how we're doing it and the process and all that stuff. But yeah, we've already successfully enabled over 300 networks across the US, thousands and thousands of buildings, and look forward to sharing more with the folks on the show.
Absolutely. No, that's very interesting. And you've been working on this for quite a while before you started American Bandwidth. You were at Boingo, right? So that's you've done it all. You just nothing new for you.
No, it's a matter of watching the business model and the motivations of all the various players change over the course of the years. And I think things have definitely changed a lot most recently on the carrier side. If you look at what happens for private networks, that a carrier will happily join a walk-in gateway and send traffic your way on a private network, but they're not going to pay for traffic. So I think the days of carriers paying for what we called offload is pretty much gone, and our focus is on enabling buildings for indoor coverage. So our product that we have is actually called Wi-DAS. So it's a Wi-Fi based DAS system, keeping in mind that a Wi-Fi network is already a distributed antenna system. All you need to
Mm.
do is make sure it's optimized for indoor coverage, make sure the Wi-Fi calling is working properly, and make sure the devices authenticate securely and automatically. And we handle all those things with our solution.
Yeah. And as you say, operators might not be willing to pay for it, but on the other hand, we've gone a long way because if you remember at the beginning, and I'm sure you do, at the very
Mhm.
beginning, they didn't even want to have Wi-Fi on the phone, right? And then they realized, well, actually, it's something good because we don't have to carry all the traffic. So, I think that now they are fully on board in supporting Wi-Fi. Now, whether and how much they're willing to pay for it, that's but anyway, so tell us a little bit about what is your approach, what is that you do differently, or what is that you help, what problem you try to solve.
Well, so Benzie, there's a wide variety of buildings out there that have never been appropriate for an indoor cellular solution. I'm talking about, like, for instance, K through 12 school districts here in the US. There's really almost no cases I can think of where people have deployed a DAS system. Maybe they've experimented with, passive repeaters, things like that, but there's not really been a scalable solution for K through 12. And so, but that being said, almost all school districts have a very high quality enterprise grade Wi-Fi network with great backhaul. So it's fairly straightforward for us to, apply numerous optimizations to those Wi-Fi networks and then enable Passpoint so that the tier one carriers we work with can connect securely and automatically. And when that happens, it's basically like a DAS network. When you're connected using SIM credentials to a Wi-Fi network, they get all the data services you need. Um, and if you use the native dialer to make a phone call, it's using Wi-Fi calling, but that's good cellular experience indoors for those folks.
So let me step back to make sure we have everybody on board here. What is Passpoint giving you that you wouldn't have? So if I go to a school and there is no Passpoint, what's the difference? Because I can still use Wi-Fi for making calls, but what's the
Well,
difference?
there's a couple things. I mean, obviously, if you don't have Passpoint, then there's extra steps that you need to take to get the devices onto the network. And there's captive portal, there's, places where you can enter a username and password, there's WPA2 keys. There's lots of ways, but you're asking the user to open the settings of their phone and take steps in order to connect. So with Passpoint, as you step in the building, it uses the SIM credentials to get a secure connection. It's just automatic. It's carrier grade security. The other reason you want that secure connection is that there's a key feature in Wi-Fi called fast roaming. That feature only works when you have a secure connection, not on an insecure connection. So that fast handover from AP to AP to avoid drop calls when you're on Wi-Fi calling isn't really working that well unless you have a secure connection. So getting connected to the captive portal with a free and open SSID is actually not a good solution for Wi-Fi calling.
Mhm. But in order for the school kids in your example to be connected, what is that they
Mhm.
need to have on their phone, or what is that they need to have a Passpoint enabled? What is
So
that?
if the Wi-Fi radio is on, they'll connect with Passpoint. Every mobile operator, every carrier in the US has deployed Passpoint profiles to their phones. So it's there and the devices will act on it automatically. If your Wi-Fi radio is off, we can't help you. But if the Wi-Fi
Yeah.
radio is on, the
Mhm.
connection's automatic.
Yeah, but then you need to have your operator to have Passpoint enabled. So if you are in a different country where that doesn't happen, then it just wouldn't work. I'm just trying to sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a kind of a prerequisite that the mobile operator does need to work with Apple and Google to say, please include my Passpoint profile in carrier settings or in my carrier specific build for your Android device, what have you. Um, so there's a step that one needs to take, which has been done by all of the mobile operators in the United States. And I am talking to a few folks in Europe and in Asia about the benefits and letting them know that this could be done outside the US. But for now, we're just American bandwidth, just because of that hard requirement of those profiles being out there to enable the solution.
Yeah, but so in the US, and it's sort of the ideal market where operators have it, it doesn't have to think about anything. It's just automatically there in the same way that when you get a new phone, it has Wi-Fi with different features, and that's one of them. And so you don't have to worry. So from the user point of view, there is nothing to do.
Yep.
The operator has it, you know, countrywide. And so what you do, you work with the school to basically make sure that the network works with Passpoint. Is that a fair
Well,
characterization?
about half of what we do is enabling Passpoint, which is the easy part, right? We have our own cloud-based radio solution and a full reporting system on how Passpoint's being used by the various carriers in various schools, for example. But that's just half of it. The other
Mhm.
half of what we do is we optimize that network for indoor coverage specifically. So when it comes to Wi-Fi calling, we make sure that the fast roaming feature is enabled. Wi-Fi calling requires that the device sets up an IPsec tunnel to
Mhm.
the carrier's IMS servers. And so we need to make sure that those ports and IP addresses aren't being blocked by their firewall. We always discourage people from using 2.4 gigahertz spectrum for a variety of reasons. But the main reason is that we want devices when they get to the door and walk outside to stop being connected to Wi-Fi. The best experience is you want to have cellular outdoors and Wi-Fi indoors. And there's other pieces that because you need to think about, such as how large your private IP address pool is and your DHCP lease times, because there are when every single smartphone that walks into your venue can connect. There's other things you need to think about, and we've been doing this for 10 years, so we do
Mhm.
optimize those networks, including all the things as mentioned and quite a few others.
So, and your optimization is mostly based on at the software level, or is it also the RF? So you say, okay, you guys, you need to have more access points, or you need to, structure it differently. You get involved with that as well.
Yeah, as part of our engagement, we do ask to get the as-built RF designs, and we can recommend more access points on occasion. But frankly speaking, today almost all Wi-Fi networks have undergone a very careful RF design. They're thinking about capacity and coverage already, and we very rarely need to recommend additional access points. It's really, we get on a Teams call or a Zoom call, and we have them open up their controller and say, "Let's check this set of settings," and frankly, we can do most of the work in about 1 hour for that optimization. And one thing to talk about is that, you know, these enterprise grade Wi-Fi networks, they almost always have 4 to 5 times the capacity they need just to get the coverage necessary for these buildings. And so there's not a lot, there's like these networks aren't impacted by adding more devices to them at all. It's kind of shocking how much extra capacity there is for almost all enterprise grade Wi-Fi. I'm ignoring stadiums and airports, which are special cases, but
Yeah, no,
for
no, no,
a
yeah.
school or a hospital or an office building, it's just way too much capacity is one way to look at it.
Well, in a way, that's a good problem to have. I mean, or it's a good problem not to have. But yeah, I think that, yeah, when you think about stadiums are really kind of in airports, they're really at the extreme. I mean, the way
Mhm.
I think about it is like if something works in a stadium, it just works everywhere else. I mean, because that's obviously one of the most challenging. You just have all the use concentrated in this relatively short amount of time and huge amounts, and it's just like the more
Exactly.
capacity, the more. So, but most of the time, we just not in the stadiums. So, um, and so there is more capacity. I guess that maybe 2.4 is more constrained, but what about 6 gigahertz? Is that something that, that maybe most places don't even need that yet, but you see much of a use
Yeah, well, starting to come out. There's some Wi-Fi, probably like 10 to 20% of our deployments have some Wi-Fi 6E.
Mhm.
So it has 6 gigahertz spectrum. I don't think we have any Wi-Fi 7 active so far, but it's coming quick because
Mhm.
the Wi-Fi 7 deployments are coming pretty quickly. Um, but either way, yeah, it's nice to have 6 gigahertz spectrum because it's still pretty clean, lots of available channels, and it functions great. So, but obviously, not all devices support it yet. So you need a mix of 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz spectrum. But 2.4, it's
Mhm.
good to avoid at all costs. For if you have IoT devices, let them take care of that separately. But for indoor coverage, we don't recommend you use it at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I guess that from your point of view, if you have the devices and you have the network that uses Wi-Fi 6 or 7, it doesn't matter. Right? It's just a
Mhm.
different channel. So from your solution, it's you're an agnostic to that.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the business model there for let's just look at it. What is it in there for the operator and for the venue?
So, I mean, we have our relationship with the mobile operators, and they all have their own requirements around, how the authentication traffic needs to look, what sort of reporting we're able to do, certain minimum requirements on, how do you validate a venue as a good candidate for
Mhm.
this sort of indoor coverage solution. But that's, we need to have that relationship with the carrier to make our solution work. And we have
Mhm.
those in place with multiple tier one operators. And we're trying to grow it to include even more, even tier twos and tier threes here in the US. Um, But for the venue, we bring all that to the table, and we do charge the venue. It's, a fraction of the cost of a DAS or small cell deployment. But we do charge a small amount that, covers our costs and hopes to give us the motivation to deploy lots of venues. So we have, as once again, lots of different verticals we've been able to deploy with this model. So about over 60 school districts, so hundreds and hundreds of schools, about 30 different colleges and universities. Same thing, it's, covering these massive campuses. And I think we have over 25 hospital groups we've deployed with, some of which are quite large. Um, we've done government offices quite a bit too. So, city and state, local government offices
Mhm.
and facilities, and some hospitality, not a ton so far. And there's reasons about that we could talk through if you're interested. And then retail is an interesting area where these are large, lots of big box stores out there. And actually, I'd say
Mhm.
of our thousands of buildings, I'd say most of the thousands are in these big box retail chains that have a huge need for this sort of solution.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I want to know about the hospitality one because actually I'm curious because they really need something, in my
They
experience.
do.
So go
They
ahead, go
need
ahead.
it, but yeah, I mean, so but certain segments like that, you have multiple motivations, right? So if you're amongst some of the bigger brands on the hospitality side, you really are almost addicted to the marketing information you get from your end users. And Passpoint by nature, you're not sharing who you are with that venue. It's like, this is a user from this mobile operator when you connect, and that's it. So they lose the visibility
Mm,
unless, Passpoint has the other capability of you can have your own Passpoint profile embedded in a loyalty app, let's say. And I think the
mhm.
biggest of the hospitality brands are leaning more into that as a possibility, as opposed to, solving indoor coverage quickly and easily, taking advantage of the existing Passpoint profiles on the smartphones. So smaller brands, boutique brands and the less high-end ones that aren't mining marketing information so much are definitely open to it. And we are working with some of those, and that's beginning to scale up. But it's an area where the brands you think of first are the ones that are least likely to do indoor coverage using the carrier Passpoint profiles.
Yeah. I guess that what you're saying is that if I go to say a hospital, the hospital doesn't really, they just want to really they want me to have a
Mhm.
good experience, but they don't care what is that I want to do there. I mean, it's not like a hotel where they always try to sell something onto you, like whatever services.
Yeah, hospitals want good indoor coverage, universities want good indoor coverage, and
Yeah.
and there's those cases too that we play pretty nicely with other
Mhm.
cellular solutions. So when you talk
Mhm.
about K through 12, there's no cellular solution that you're going to deploy there in almost any case. At a university, they're going to want to put a private 5G in their innovation building. They're going to want to have something with protected spectrum by the ticket gates in their stadium. So, but they don't want to spend, over $1 a square foot or even more to put that across the entire campus. So we're good for the classrooms and the dorms, and there's others. You do cellular solutions, other parts of the network. There's multiple pieces to the puzzle to solve the wireless coverage problem on a college campus, and the same applies to a hospital, right? There might be certain departments with certain equipment, they want to have protected spectrum and they want to
Mhm.
deploy private network, but they don't think it makes sense to deploy the private network across the entire facilities. So we can fit nicely with a private network deployment or other cellular solution, and
Mhm.
cover, the areas that cannot be covered with the others. And it's also granular. So let's say there might be a hospital where one tier one operator's put in a DAS, but nobody else has. Then we can
Mhm.
just change the configuration to not include the carrier that's on the DAS in the Passpoint solution. So that's all that we
Yeah.
can harmonize nicely.
Yeah. No, yeah, and I guess you're true. It's true that there is so much. not everybody is doing the same thing, but what you have, I think it's quite impressive in terms of getting all those venues, because there is again, hospitality is very different than a school,
Yeah.
or educational environment. Now, um, one thing is that, I've always been a big proponent of Wi-Fi, but I have to ask you this. I mean, like, why not using small cells when you go into indoor? So clearly, and I think, indoor coverage is absolutely, or indoor connectivity, so coverage and capacity is crucial
Mhm.
because we spend most of the time indoors. It's just like nothing, this is not going to change. It doesn't matter, right? And
Right.
so, or even it could be like the sort of outdoors, like a stadium is sort of not really indoors. It's like an in-between gray area. And then if you go to the parking lot, is that indoors or outdoors? So let's forget about it. But most of the time we are indoors, and Wi-Fi is works pretty well. However, there are also some advantages, especially if you're an operator, to have small cells, and they are getting, relatively speaking, cheaper. So, um, are you doing something also on the Wi-Fi? So sorry, on the cellular side, and if not, why not? Especially in the US with CBRS, wouldn't you be able to
Hmm.
go for CBRS
Well,
instead?
so I guess what it comes down to, we don't see a lot of CBRS private network deployments out there in general, indoors. I think that there are edge cases where they do come about, and I think it does make sense, but we don't come across it a lot. But we, especially to the degree that, people are deploying private network and they have a SIM card or eSIM, there's no reason we can't have a Passpoint profile as a part of that to have a unified identity that goes between Wi-Fi and that private network in those deployments. So that's something we're interested in. Um, but back to, I think, the core of your question, there's no reason not to deploy private network indoors, except that, in most cases, there's already an enterprise grade Wi-Fi network there. Enabling this solution that we provide is, it's a fraction of the cost of deploying a private network. So I guess you'd have to have really firm use case for, let's say, protected spectrum or particular use cases that require that equipment to justify it. Like I said, there's the ticket gates at a stadium, or you want to have an innovation center where people are interested in the cellular industry in general and they want to experiment with 5G. There's cases like that where it makes a ton of sense. But if you just want to have your phone get connected and be able to, use various services when you're in the classroom or in the dorm or in your hospital room, I don't think it makes that much sense to, you know, spend over $1 per square foot to deploy private network in those cases. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, but I guess that's kind of like, as long as Wi-Fi works, why do something else? I mean, it just seems like and I guess you see in a lot of enterprises that they start going into private. I mean, well, actually, Wi-Fi is the private network. I mean, right? But to do
Mhm.
cellular private networks, you just do it if you have a need. So that means that at some point, if Wi-Fi is not sufficient for whatever reason, and
Mhm.
cellular gives you that capability, but it seems like in a lot of cases, if you have a capacity issue, then you just add some access points, right? And how much of a capacity issue would you usually face?
I mean, usually you're not adding more access points for a capacity issue, you're adding more access points for a coverage issue. Once
Mhm.
again, for a Wi-Fi, you have 4 to 5 times the capacity you need just to get the coverage you need. It's the way that Wi-Fi happens to be designed. I mean, and it comes to 5G, there's going to be cases, and it may come up more and more in the future. I mean, 5G networks do have also a massive amount of capacity in them. It just, is there a use case to justify deploying it? And I think the reason that Wi-Fi is getting so much more momentum is that the enterprises are being asked to pay for it now. If the carriers are funding it, I think that they can deploy it where they want. But if the enterprise was asked to fund it and they already have a Wi-Fi network, they'd like to find a way to utilize it, especially because there's so much more spare capacity, and that's not even thinking about 6 gigahertz spectrum. With that,
Yeah.
it could very well be that only 5 to 10% of the capacity is being used by default. So adding a little more, a Passpoint enabled solution is going to not even put a dent in that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially also because if you get to the voice, it's just like the percentage of traffic is tiny compared to whatever capacity you have in any network, really. It's
Yeah,
like low
exactly.
tech.
And think about the density of the access points as well. That really, and when it comes to the wireless portion of a connection, there's almost no latency in that as well because it's all so close together versus
Yeah,
having to get out to a cell tower. So there's quite a few advantages of using
yeah.
a Passport enabled Wi-Fi enterprise grade network indoors.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I guess, sometimes you hear people complaining about Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi doesn't work. But I guess also I have to say that that's the people that complain about cellular too. There seems to be a percentage of people out there that complain about anything out there, but when you think about it, actually things work, relatively speaking,
Well, these
pretty
people
well.
actually they'll complain that the Wi-Fi is bad and it's a cellular problem, and vice versa. People just if they're having an issue, they want to blame somebody, but it's strange that people don't even name the right technology when they're complaining most of the time.
Yeah, well, because if in fact, oftentimes you just don't know where you're on. So they might complain about 5G, for instance, but they don't actually, oftentimes even if there is a 5G network, you're actually not connected to the 5G network, you're connected to 4G. So, well,
Well, that's an interesting thing to mention too, is that part of the issue that we're helping to address is that the smartphones have been designed by the device manufacturers, I guess, if you have 5G enabled, it prefers 5G. So LTE spectrum does penetrate walls pretty well. 5G
mhm,
spectrum, generally speaking, comparatively does not. And
mhm.
you'd think it'd be fairly simple for the devices to fall back to LTE more aggressively, and that would help with indoor coverage problems as well. But
It-
because but that's
so
not what's happening. The phone will hang on to like 1 bar of 5G instead of going back to LTE.
Yeah, but that's why some people disconnect 5G. If you are in a place where that is an issue, then you just but also sometimes because you don't have voice over 5G, that you need to revert back to 4G to do voice. So um anyway, this is a different this is a
Yeah.
different topic. But what I wanted to ask you about is at the very beginning you mentioned DAS and Wi-Fi. Can you explain that in sense of why should we think about the Wi-Fi network as a sort of a DAS network?
Well, because it is. So you've already, if you're an enterprise, you're a school, you're a university, you're a hospital, you're a retail store, you've already gone through the trouble of deploying a distributed antenna system. It happens to be Wi-Fi access points, but
Mhm,
that is a distributed system of antennas. Um, and if you wanted to put in another DAS, you'd have to pull more cables and provide more power sources, and you'd find a closet to put in a head end and things like that, and that's just prohibitively expensive. So I just want people to understand that their Wi-Fi network is already a DAS, and all we need to do is you know the convergence concept, right? Passpoint allows you to authenticate with the carriers, and then
mhm.
we can take the additional steps in our Wi-DAS solution to make sure your network's optimized for indoor coverage, and that when you walk outside, you do smoothly transition from Wi-Fi to cellular, because that's the goal. Once again, 5G networks have fantastic capacity. That's not the problem. The problem is that they have trouble penetrating walls. And we want to just make sure that the Wi-Fi network doesn't hold on for too long if you leave. So most enterprise grade gear has a setup where you can require a minimum RSSI to be
Mhm.
connected at the perimeter. So we want you to drop off and get onto cellular so I can get outdoors. Because cellular is great outdoors, but Wi-Fi is great indoors. How do we make those two networks work great together?
Yeah, and I guess that convergence is actually problematic from sort of like uh, well, a technology point of view because on Wi-Fi it's the device that tries to keep onto Wi-Fi. you just kind of
Mhm.
the device gets Wi-Fi, and from a cellular network, the cellular network started to steal the device from Wi-Fi. So they're actually trying to control the call in fundamentally different ways,
Well,
right?
I guess if you had a solution like ANDSF or ATSSS, it could theoretically do that. But Apple and Google aren't really putting those sorts of solutions on their handsets, and I don't expect them to. And so you need to design solutions around what the various technological players are going to allow to happen with their devices. And this is why we focus. And as you and I'll mention this too. This is actually kind of important. Um, this we have to work with the way the connection managers do work, and the way they
Hmm.
do work is they prefer a manually configured network first, and
Hmm.
then they'll prefer Passpoint. And only
Hmm.
if there's neither a manually configured Wi-Fi network and no Passpoint network, then they'll deign themselves to use cellular. It's cellular is the network of the last resort when it comes to the connection managers provided by Apple and Google. Um,
Hmm.
and so we have to design when I talk about convergence. I think waiting for ATSSS to get broadly deployed is you could do that, but we have a problem with indoor coverage now, right? So why don't you design a solution that thinks about what the devices are going to do, and then you design the network to harmonize with that. So you get to the edge of the network and you walk outside, you should drop Wi-Fi. You don't want to have access points enabled for Passpoint outdoors doing crazy things. You want to be on cellular outdoors and Wi-Fi indoors, and you want that transition to be smooth. And you can easily design an enterprise grade network to do that, but it takes some expertise. But that's what we do.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's a challenge. Although now, I want to ask you a final question. So in the U.S., we're covered, not a problem. But what about the
Mhm.
other countries? How is
Well,
that?
so
Because
once again, the
Passpoint
standards
and
there,
everybody. Mhm. Yeah,
the standards there. So Passpoint works. The same is the same Wi-Fi equipment that's available worldwide. It's not,
yeah.
special to the United States. The challenge is that, yeah, the mobile operators need to recognize the benefits of getting indoor coverage using Passpoint as a key component, and then they need to work with Apple and Google or Samsung or Motorola to deploy the Passpoint profiles for them. In the case of Apple, it's a checkbox on your um, relationship document with them. You say, I want to have this EAP AKA profile embedded in my carrier settings. And if you
Mhm.
provision an eSIM, it just downloads it automatically. Um, Google has an ability to do a similar thing. And then you also have the option on Android to embed the Passpoint profile in your carrier specific builds with the Samsungs and Motorola. So it's all possible to do, but the mobile operator needs to decide there's a benefit for taking those steps. We
Mhm.
successfully over the past decade worked with the mobile operators here to get them to take that step. And a few outside the US have done it, of course, but it's not a lot. And
Mhm.
we're hoping that we can prove out the value of this solution
Mhm.
here to put more motivation out there. So I'm starting to evangelize it a little bit, but it's going to take time.
Why is it taking? I mean, why is it in the U.S.? Because you could argue that, say, in Europe, there is even more of an indoor problem because there are thicker walls, more buildings, So in a way, it's worse in Europe. So you'd think that the operators would be more motivated rather than less.
It's just that when you're talking to a mobile operator, there's a few exceptions. Most of them, what's that idea, right? If you have a hammer, you're always looking for a nail.
Hmm.
Um, Wi-Fi isn't in the core problem solving toolkit of the average mobile operator. It just isn't. And many of them haven't heard of Passpoint. I'm
Hmm.
talking to some folks in European country about how to solve their problem, and they are still thinking about how to use a fixed SSID and EAP SIM to solve their problem, which has lots of limitations that it creates. Where Passpoint's been around since 2012, and why don't you use that, please? So it's a matter of education and awareness, and just trying it out. So once again, I'm optimistic. This could become a global solution for folks, but we're smart enough to keep focused on the market where we only have to worry about a handful of operators, and the problem has been addressed, and we just need to more focus on business model and how to explain it to, not to the carriers, but to explain it to the school districts, to explain it to the local government offices, to explain it to the hospitals. That's a different problem to solve than the cultural shift that comes from working with mobile operator and showing the benefits of this sort of solution. That just takes time.
Okay, well, I hope it works, because that would be good. It's good to have it in the US, but it's also, I mean, to have it as a global solution, that would just be better, not just for those countries, but everybody also traveling
It's good
across.
for everybody that wants to get connected indoors. Wouldn't it be great just to have it all work? No, we all want that.
Anyway, well, Howard, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. I think you guys have a very interesting approach to offload, and changes the kind of like a lot of the stereotypes that we have, like, oh, offload, but
I don't even use the word offload. It's indoor coverage. We are an alternative to a DAS to solve indoor coverage, and I think it's a better way to think about it, because once again, offload implies that there's a capacity problem on the mobile networks, and there is not. These 5G networks are freshly deployed. They have a lot of capacity in them. This is why fixed wireless access is something they're trying to sell, because they want to use up that capacity. So capacity, they're not trying to offload, but they need to penetrate walls with signal, and that's harder with that spectrum. And keep in mind that 6G is going to be 7 gigahertz spectrum theoretically. That doesn't penetrate walls any better. So this is a problem we need to get our arms around soon, so that everybody has a good experience indoors.
Yeah, it's getting, I mean, the indoor coverage is getting incrementally worse, because you have all the new regulations. So the signal doesn't, even the same signal doesn't penetrate as well as it used to, because of all the windows and all the other stuff, and because we're moving up in frequency. So it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
So
and once again, the tools are here to fix it. And, once again, Wi-Fi is part of the toolkit. Private network is part of the toolkit. Indoor cellular is part of the toolkit. But we need to find ways to make those solutions work better together to solve the problem in a way that helps the most people possible.
And that is affordable, because especially when you get to, say, schools, you cannot expect them. I mean, they have a limited budget.
Correct.
So
Luckily,
need to
we found a solution that's affordable for schools, and we do spend a lot of time with schools because there's never been a solution for them before. And we probably do integrate maybe 3 to 5 school districts a week. That's a very popular area for us to do our work, but there's a lot more schools in the US for us to help out. So we're focusing on delivering for schools, hospitals, government offices, and just keep continuing to scale there. It's been pretty fun.
Absolutely. Howard, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks, Monica.
And thank you all for listening. And please do continue to listen to us and subscribe to the Sparring Partners feed. And we'll see you next time.